Welcome to Sound of Resistance channel. The breathtaking struggle continues in Ukraine. On the one hand, Ukrainians who are devoted to the freedom of their country. On the other hand, Russia, who wanted to return home without fulfilling her purpose. Both sides are playing their trump card in Ukraine. The sound of conflict between the Ukrainian and Russian army can be heard even in neighboring countries. Neighboring countries are anxiously waiting for the conflict to end. The pain of losing Kherson lies among the reasons why the conflicts in Ukraine have accelerated in recent days. With the withdrawal of his troops from Kherson in the south of Ukraine, Russian leader Putin opened the doors to the Crimea for the Ukrainian army. It is the first time that Crimea has come to such a dangerous position after its annexation by Russia in 2014. The Russian authorities have no patience for a possible attack on Crimea. The attack of the Ukrainian army on the Kerch bridge on the Crimean road last month made a big noise. Russian leader Putin, in retaliation for the Kerch bridge attack, instructed the Russian commanders and started a missile attack covering the Ukrainian city centers. Russia's loss of Kherson is very similar to the Crimean attack. Again, Putin takes the pain of his lost lands by targeting the regions held by Ukraine. The Russian leader carried out attacks that put the life of many civilians at risk, especially in Kiev, in his attack on Ukrainian urban centers. The Russian army focused on breaking the resistance of the Ukrainian people in the attack. The Russian army targeted energy resources and infrastructure system in Ukraine. The aim of the Russian army is to make the Ukrainian people react and revolt against the president of Ukraine. However, the attacks carried out by Russian leader Putin in Ukraine had to be ended before they could reach their goal. The reason why the Russian army had to end its attacks was that the Ukrainian people resisted the missile attack of Putin's army with determination, without compromising their unity and solidarity. Another reason was that the Ukrainian army, with its state-of-the-art air defense systems, neutralized the Russian missiles before they reached their targets. The Russian army must not have learned from the unsuccessful outcome its missile attack on the Ukrainian city centers, and it is resorting to similar methods in Kherson. The loss of Kherson in the south of Ukraine ignited the fuse of Russian attacks. Russian soldiers are trying to burn down whatever comes their way in Kherson retaliation. But the Ukrainian army successfully repelled the attacks of Putin's army, and the Ukrainian army is carrying out attacks on Russia as a lesson. In the statement made by the Ukrainian General Staff, it was said that the Ukrainian armed forces destroyed the Russian headquarters and two command points in Melitopol. In the past 24 hours, the Ukrainian armed forces repelled Russian attacks around 7 cities, towns and villages in the Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, hitting critical Russian military targets, destroying a Russian headquarters and two command posts. According to the information released by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, in the last 24 hours, the Ukrainian Defense Forces repelled Russian attacks in Stelmakivka and Bilohorivka and around Verkhokamyanske, Soledar, Nevelske, Marinka and Pervomaisk. Russian forces resorted to their usual tactic, trying to intimidate the inhabitants of the area. Russian troops continued to fire at positions of the Ukrainian armed forces and at civilian settlements around the contact line. Russian troops carried out more than 40 attacks using multiple launch rocket systems, as well as 4 airstrikes and 6 missile strikes on Ukraine. Russian missiles also targeted civilian infrastructure in the city of Zaporizhia. As a result of the attack of the Russian soldiers, there was no change in the Volny and Polisia fronts. However, the threat of missile and airstrikes from Belarusian territory to Ukraine remains. Russian forces continued to fire at military and civilian targets in Ukraine. On the Slobozhanchina front, Russian forces deployed mortar and tube artillery in Starsia and Ambarne and surrounding areas. On the Kupiansk and Lyman fronts, Russian forces deployed tank guns and various types of artillery to fire on and around areas in Kupiansk, Kailivska, Krokmalne, Brestove, Novoselivka, Stelmakivka, Makivka and Poloshanka. On the Bakhmut front, the Russians deployed tank guns and all kinds of artillery at their disposal to fire on the areas in and around Serebryanka, Spirne, Rozdolivka, Yakovlivka, Soledar, Bakhmushke, Bakhmut, Optine, Zelenopilia, Andrivka, Kurdyumivka and Ozarinievka. On the Advivka front, the Russians deployed tank guns, mortars and tubular and rocket artillery to fire on the areas around New York, Krasnorinka, Kamyanka, Avdivka, Pervomaiske, Nevelske and Marinka. On the Novopavlivka front, the Russians, using various types of artillery, opened fire on Vuhledar, Bohivlenka, Preshtivka and Vremivka and the surrounding areas. On the Zaporizhia front, Russian forces, using tanks and artillery of various calibers, opened fire on Hulyavliske, Novoadrivka and Sherbaki and the surrounding areas. On the Kherson front, Zelenivka, Chornobivka and Kherson came under Russian fire. Nikopol and Chervonohorivka also came under Russian fire. Despite all the attacks carried out by the Russian army, the Russian forces continue to suffer losses in Ukraine. The Russian General Staff confirmed that on November 15, the Ukrainian armed forces destroyed the headquarters of a Russian contingent in Melitopol. Ukrainian defense forces also destroyed 2 Russian ammunition storage points near Kinsky Rozdori, Vladivka and Blahovishchenka, 2 BM-21 Grad multiple launch rocket systems and an S-300 missile system belonging to the Russian army. About 100 Russian military personnel died in the attacks of the Ukrainian army. Meanwhile, Ukraine's rocket forces and artillery struck 2 Russian command posts, 6 Russian military personnel, weapons and equipment clusters, 3 ammunition storage points and 3 other critical military targets. In the past 24 hours, Ukrainian aircraft have carried out airstrikes on 2 Russian anti-aircraft missile systems. Russian forces intensified filtering measures in the Kakhovka area after the Ukrainian defense forces successfully attacked the position of the Russian troops. The Russians are placing mines around infrastructure facilities in the city of Kakhovka and systematically demolishing cell towers. According to the information obtained by the Russian General Staff, all textbooks on the history of Ukraine in the city of Enerhodar were confiscated and will be destroyed. An event that took place on the territory of Ukraine was quite remarkable. At the request of the self-proclaimed authorities in the temporarily occupied Donetsk Oblast, the cities of Horlivka and Mariupol were awarded honorary titles by decrees of the President of the Russian Federation. Another remarkable news was shared by the United Nations. The world's most vulnerable countries, many of whom are battling hunger, will avert a price shock, saying a wartime deal that unblocks grain shipment from Ukraine and helps soften rising global food prices will be extended by 4 months, the United Nations and other parties to the agreement said on Thursday. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky described the 120-day extension as a key decision in the global fight against the food crisis. Striking in the midst of Russia's war in Ukraine, the venture established a secure shipping corridor and inspection procedures in the Black Sea to address concerns that cargo ship might carry weapons or launch attacks. The agreement that Ukraine and Russia signed separately with the United Nations and Turkey on July 22 was due to expire on Saturday. Russia confirmed the extension but said it expects progress in removing barriers to Russian food and fertilizer exports. Ukraine and Russia are major global suppliers of wheat, barley, sunflower oil and other foods to parts of Africa, the Middle East and parts of Asia where millions of poor people cannot find enough food. Russia was also the world's largest fertilizer exporter before the war. The loss of these resources after Russia's February 24 invasion of Ukraine had driven up global food prices and fueled concerns of a hunger crisis in poorer countries. The extension of the grain corridor agreement between Russia and Ukraine will allow the countries in need to take a deep breath even in a short time. Thank you for watching us.